In the quiet stillness of a suburban neighborhood, where every driveway gleamed with polished cars and manicured lawns whispered of pride and order, something unusual was happening, something so bold, so outrageous, that it went unnoticed for weeks. A luxury Tesla sat parked night after night, its charging cable quietly snaking into a neighbor's garage, stealing electricity that didn't belong to it. At first glance, it seemed harmless, even clever. But behind the facade of silent power theft was a deeper story, one of entitlement, arrogance, and racial prejudice. Because the homeowner whose power was being drained wasn't just any man, he was a hard-working black father who had fought for every brick, every bulb, every bill paid with sweat and sacrifice. And the woman siphoning from his garage, the homeowners association president herself, the very person sworn to keep order in the neighborhood, the one everyone trusted to enforce the rules. But that trust masked a dangerous arrogance. She thought she could take advantage, thought she could cross boundaries without consequences, thought he would stay silent out of fear or humiliation. What she didn't know, however, was that silence was never his weapon. He had something else: patience, knowledge, and the power to turn her reckless greed into the spark of her downfall. And when he acted, he didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't call the police. Instead, he engineered a solution so brilliant, so devastating, that the next time she plugged her Tesla into his home, sparks literally flew. This is the story of how arrogance met resistance, how hidden prejudice met quiet resilience, and how one act of theft turned into an unforgettable lesson no one in that neighborhood would ever forget. The neighborhood was the kind that seemed pulled straight from a glossy magazine. Perfectly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and neighbors who waved while secretly watching every move. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than reality, where order was enforced not just by rules, but by whispers, stares, and unspoken judgments. And in the middle of this picture-perfect suburb lived Marcus, a man who had worked his way up from nothing, who knew the value of every single watt of electricity he paid for, because nothing in his life had ever been handed to him. He was a father, a homeowner, and someone who believed in living with dignity, no matter how. Many invisible eyes followed him when he walked through the neighborhood. Marcus's home was his pride. He had worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and made countless sacrifices to finally give his family a space that was theirs, a space that represented stability and security. For him, the house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was proof that despite the barriers society tried to place before him, he could still rise. But for the HOA president, Karen, it was different. Her home wasn't about sacrifice, it was about image. She was the kind of woman who spoke loudly about rules but bent them whenever it suited her. She dressed in crisp, expensive clothes, always flashing smiles at the right people while quietly dismissing those she considered beneath her. And Marcus? To her, he was one of those people. It started small. Marcus noticed his electricity bills creeping higher, though his habits hadn't changed. He shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe the summer heat had pushed his AC harder, but then he saw it. A sleek Tesla parked suspiciously close to his property, a charging cable trailing from his garage outlet into the glossy white car. At first he thought maybe it was a mistake, a one-time accident, maybe even a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The next night and the night after that, the Tesla was there again, silently leaching power. And then Marcus saw her, the HOA president herself, plugging it in, acting as though his garage outlet belonged to her. No asking, no explanation, just entitlement wrapped in a designer cardigan. Marcus wanted to confront her right there, to demand why she thought she could steal from him so openly. But he paused. He knew how these things went. He knew the accusations she might throw back, loud, dramatic, turning neighbors into a jury against him. It wasn't just about power theft anymore. It was about something far more insidious, the assumption that she could take, and he would, stay silent. So he waited. He observed. He gathered quiet evidence, photos, notes, timestamps. He built his patience like a fortress, waiting for the right moment to strike. Because Marcus knew one thing: Karen believed she was untouchable. But every act of arrogance carries within it the seed of its own downfall, and Marcus was ready to plant that seed. Marcus had always believed that peace in the neighborhood depended on respect. You mow your lawn, keep your trash bins in line, wave politely at the people across the street, and in return, you expect the same courtesy. But with Karen, courtesy was a foreign language. Night after night, the same scene replayed like a cruel joke. The sleek Tesla would roll silently into Marcus's driveway, its headlights cutting across the darkness like eyes daring him to react. The charging cable would snake into his garage outlet, pulling energy that Marcus worked and paid for, as if his labor meant nothing. Marcus tried to ignore it at first. He reminded himself, don't give her a reason, don't create a scene, don't let her twist the story. Because deep down he knew how quickly the narrative could turn against him. He'd seen it before in workplaces, in stores, even on sidewalks. Moments where his simple presence was painted as a threat, where his calm words were exaggerated into aggression. But ignoring it only made the wound deeper. Each stolen watt wasn't just electricity, it was disrespect. It was Karen sending a message. Your property, your effort, your boundaries don't matter here. And that message burned hotter than any spike on his utility bill. One evening, as Marcus sat in his living room with the lights dimmed, he heard it again, the faint hum of the Tesla charging outside. He peeked through the blinds, watching her, lean casually against the car, scrolling on her phone as though nothing in the world was wrong. The arrogance in her posture struck him like a slap across the face. Marcus thought about confronting her. He pictured himself stepping outside, demanding she unplug, asking her what gave her the right. But then he imagined her voice, raised, trembling with mock fear, claiming he was intimidating her. He imagined neighbors rushing out, phones recording, headlines forming before he even had a chance to defend himself. So instead of words, Marcus turned to strategy. He began tracking everything. The time she arrived, how long the Tesla charged, even the slight uptick in his electric meter. He took pictures, her car in his driveway, the cable dragging across his property. He kept notes so detailed they could read like a diary of theft. This wasn't just preparation, it was survival. Because if he ever needed to defend himself, evidence would be his only shield. But something inside Marcus shifted as the weeks passed. Evidence wasn't enough. He didn't just want to prove what she was doing. He wanted her to feel what she had so carelessly dismissed, the sting of being used, the weight of being powerless in your own home. And then came the breaking point. One Saturday morning, Marcus stepped outside to find his kids playing basketball in the driveway. The Tesla sat there, plugged in as always. But this time, Karen wasn't alone. She had brought over a friend, laughing loudly as though Marcus's driveway was a lounge for her entertainment. The sight of his children forced to play around her car ignited something in Marcus he couldn't push down anymore. Enough was enough. Marcus didn't storm out. He didn't shout or threaten. Instead, he thought carefully, methodically. He worked quietly in his garage, hands steady, mind sharper than ever. If Karen wanted his electricity, she was going to get it, but not in the way she expected. He installed a power regulator, one that would allow a surge at just the right moment. Safe for his home, perfectly within his control, but devastating for anyone who tried to abuse the system. Marcus wasn't just preparing a trap, he was reclaiming his dignity. Every coil of wire, every tightened screw felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. For too long, Karen had treated him as invisible, as someone whose labor and resources were hers to take. But Marcus wasn't invisible. He was a man, a father, a provider. And soon, she was going to realize that. The neighborhood might see Marcus as quiet, polite, even passive. But beneath that calm exterior was a storm, and Karen was about to walk right into the center of it. Days passed, and Marcus carried himself as though nothing had changed. He went to work, waved at neighbors, kept his routine. But inside, He was waiting for the moment, watching the clock, listening for the faint hum that had become so familiar, the sound of his dignity being siphoned away. That night, the sound came. The Tesla pulled into his driveway like clockwork, headlights washing over the basketball hoop where his kids usually played. The cable slithered from the garage outlet, connecting greedily to the car's charging port. Karen leaned against the hood, smug as ever, scrolling through her phone as though she owned the very ground she stood on. Marcus watched from the window, calm on the outside but steady as steel within. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He waited until the car had been charging long enough until the current surged steadily through the cable. Then, with a flick of his hand, he triggered the regulator. At first it was subtle, a faint crackle, a shimmer of heat running along the cord. But then came the spark. Bright, violent, electric. It shot through the cable like lightning, snapping across the driveway with a sound that tore through the silence of the night. Karen jumped back, her phone clattering to the pavement as the Tesla hissed, alarms blaring. The smell of burning circuits filled the air as the dashboard lit up with error codes. Sparks danced against the metal, and the glossy white finish that once gleamed like a status symbol now reflected nothing but chaos. Neighbors' doors flew open. Porch lights blinked awake. People gathered at the edge of their driveways, drawn by the noise, the smell, the spectacle. And there she was, Karen, standing frozen beside her expensive car, her face pale with shock, her arrogance crumbling in front of the very community she once ruled. She scrambled to unplug the charger, fumbling with the cable as sparks spit it. Her hands, her once pristine Tesla, her badge of superiority, now sputtered and whined like a wounded animal. And Marcus? He didn't move. He stood in his doorway, arms folded, calm and unshaken, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Neighbors asked one another what had happened, piecing together the truth with each glance at Marcus's untouched garage and Karen's smoking car. The evidence was undeniable. She hadn't been borrowing. She hadn't been mistaken. She had been stealing, and now everyone could see the price of her entitlement. Karen's voice, once sharp and commanding, cracked as she tried to spin excuses. She claimed the car had a fault, that she had no idea what went wrong. But her words drowned beneath the weight of reality. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. The very power she thought she could take without consequence had turned on her, exposing her arrogance in the brightest, loudest way possible. And Marcus? He didn't have to say a single word. The sparks, the smoke, and the silence of the neighborhood said everything for him. The chaos lingered in the night air, long after the sparks had died down. Karen's Tesla sat lifeless in Marcus's driveway, its glossy paint now shadowed by the scorch of burnt circuits. For the first time in a long time, the queen of complaints, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, looked small, shrunken under the weight of her own arrogance. Neighbors stood in clusters whispering in disbelief. They had seen her entitlement for years, how she issued fines for grass too long, how she harassed families she didn't like, how she acted as though rules didn't apply to her. But this was different. This was proof. Proof that her hypocrisy ran deeper than any letter stuffed into a mailbox. Marcus didn't move from his porch. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Arms crossed, steady and unbothered, he stood as the neighborhood finally saw the truth. The black man she had tried to paint as unruly, defiant, or not, fitting in was in fact the one who had lived with the most patience, the most dignity, and now the most justice. Karen's protests grew weaker with each passing second. She tried blaming the car. She tried blaming the wiring. She even tried blaming Marcus, shouting that he must have sabotaged her vehicle. But her words carried no weight anymore. Not when the evidence was sitting right there, her Tesla plugged into an outlet that wasn't hers, surrounded by witnesses who had watched it all unfold. The irony stung sharper than any insult. She had stolen electricity, energy meant for Marcus's family, power he paid for with his hard-earned money, while preaching community rules and neighborhood standards. She had treated his rights as optional, his property as hers, to take. And now the very symbol of her status had been reduced to nothing more than a hunk of dead metal in his driveway. Over the next few days, the fallout rippled through the entire HOA. Some neighbors defended her at first, but most had grown tired of her reign of pettiness. Videos from phones circulated online, spreading beyond the block. Headlines appeared. HOA president accused of stealing power. Tesla fried after neighbor sets trap. Entitlement backfires in Texas suburb. The board, once her shield, began to fracture. Members distanced themselves. Whispers of resignation circled. Lawsuits were threatened, but they didn't stick. Not when the truth was so painfully clear. Karen had crossed the line, and the scorch marks on her car were only the beginning of her downfall. And Marcus? He went back to life as normal. His kids played basketball in the driveway again, free from the glare of someone who always looked for reasons to tear them down. His mailbox stood untouched, his outlets unused by anyone but him. Peace, for once, felt possible, but more than that, something had shifted in the neighborhood itself. People began to question the HOA's power. They questioned why one person had been allowed to rule unchecked, why one family had carried the weight of constant harassment. They saw what Marcus had endured, and they couldn't unsee it. This story, though, wasn't just about wires and cars. It was about respect, about dignity, about how far someone will go when pushed too long, too hard, and too often. Marcus hadn't yelled, hadn't fought, hadn't lashed out. He had simply held his ground, and when the moment came, he let the truth reveal itself. And maybe that's the lesson here. Entitlement has a way of consuming itself. Injustice has a way of crumbling when faced with patience and preparation. And dignity? Dignity will always outlast arrogance. So the question remains, how many Karens would think twice if they knew the people they tried to exploit weren't powerless, but quietly stronger than they ever imagined?